He was always, whatever he set his mind to, usually accomplished. And so it's to his credit that he had the right idea and the ability to actually accomplish it. And I think it's also very much to his credit that he's attracted so many other good people to work with him. As they say, a man is known by the company he keeps. And so, dime con quien andas, Spanish. So, yeah, I think it's all of you deserve a lot of credit for what you're doing and the fact that you can all work together peacefully. Because even if someone has the right idea and the right material facility, it's okay, don't let it happen again. So it's, yeah, so the fact that you have the right idea and Nat Ram was able to lead the project and all of you were able to work together peacefully and make it happen, and it's really to your credit. So there's a lot of credit here to go around. So don't be shy. I mean, you can ask me like about tomorrow's weather, stock market prices, anything. Yes?
We just talked about peace. How do we create peace in the world? Given our leaders, I won't mention them by name, but
thank you.
US.
Thank you very much.
US.
Yes.
In Korea and a few others, they are our leaders here.
I would say that, yeah, first of all, okay, as there used to be a TV show when I was a kid in America called You Asked for It. So, I do, for good or evil, kind of follow world events. And I do have an academic background in history and all that stuff, which means I'm automatically right. But the problem is selfishness, really. Selfishness, of course, individually, like individual predatory capitalists or people hungry for political power. Let me just throw out an example. We talk about Turkey today and many places. So there's, so from a historical perspective, we really have to avoid a simplistic analysis. I mean, there are some people in the world who are leaders who are not the most lovable figures we've ever seen. At the same time, there's a history behind it. Things don't just happen. Like to give one obvious example, it's like what they call in America, this is like shooting fish in a barrel, you can't miss. Sorry for the non-vegetarian example. But if you look at the French Revolution, which many atrocities were committed, I mean, it was really bad. I mean, if you know your English literature, sort of the horror and the cruelty and the injustice of the French Revolution was really captured in a famous book by Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities. And by the way, we have Robespierre, who was one of the more brutal leaders of the French Revolution until the revolution killed him. He was guillotined. And he invented the term terrorism. And for him, it was a very positive term, like, that's the way to go. And he had this idea that people in general are incapable, common people, peasants, are incapable of choosing what's best for them. And therefore, they must be terrorized into virtue. So it's interesting because if you look at history, not only the selfish people, not only, let's say, people who are just transparently greedy for power, selfish, but you find, I'm almost tempted to say, at least as many, if not most, of the atrocities in world history are committed by people who strongly believe they're defending virtue or promoting virtue. And just one little statistic I'll throw out here. For example, in America now, the political left pretty much dominates the universities. And that has to do with natural proclivities as well as unnatural purges, and in terms of hiring standards and everything, especially in the humanities. And so if you go, let's say, at least in America, I won't dare to speak about Australia because I may get in a lot of trouble very quickly, but at least in America, where I know exactly what's going on, because I've studied these things, the ratio of left to right, let's say, among the typical department faculty in the humanities can be up to 30-1, which is very unnatural. That's not a naturally occurring ratio. That's actually the result of purges and discrimination and one-party system, silencing of other voices, and so on and so forth. And so, by the way, I'm not a Republican, or I didn't vote for Trump. So, but I'm just trying. And what you said is true, but I just want to balance it. I'm not trying to refute what you said. I'm trying to balance it. And that is that on most, let's say, leftist university campuses, which probably means most university campuses, if you say you're a Marxist or something, people may think you're kind of retro, but it's a little sexy to be a Marxist. If you went on the same campus, let's say with a German Nazi armband, probably would be much less appreciated. However, the numbers are that in the 20th century, we'll just talk about that, people claiming to be communists and Marxists killed between 10 and 20 times more people than Hitler. If we look at Stalin, Mao, he's just complete sociopaths who sees absolute power. Stalin, Mao, Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Castro, who was a cold-blooded killer, turned Cuba into a prison island, by the way, so that if you just, because you were starving, because people were starving, if you just got in a boat and just wanted to sail somewhere else, you're not hurting anybody, they would machine gun you in the water. So it became a prison island. So there is a tendency sometimes in the academic environment to, I'll just throw one more thing out. Another group, which at least in America, I can't at all speak for Australia, but in America, the media, the press, tends to be on the left, with one exception, and which I'm deeply grateful to all of you for sending us Rupert Murdoch, and which is probably karma for all the things we sent you. But anyway, can't talk there. Be nice, kitty. I'll give you candy. I'll give you candy later. So, but the press tends to be left. Fox News, and by the way, the Fox News you get in Australia is much more moderate. And Fox News, yeah, it is really. And the Fox News in America is very much like they're a bunch of cheerleaders for Trump. However, most of the media is left. Now, if you look at how the media covers political events, say in America or Europe, I'll throw Europe in here also, at least France, Germany, England. The way they classify political positions, it's either center or left or right or far right. There's no far left. There is a far left, but it's not a term the media uses. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Of course, when you say center, the obvious question is who decides what the center is? Because if you say something is politically right or politically left, the obvious question is who got to define the center? But there is no far left. Far left is simply not a term used by the Western media in general. So again, historically, things tend to happen in causal chains. Marx and Hegel talk about historical dialectic, thesis, the status quo, the way things are, that antithesis, because it tends to generate its own opposite force. That's the laws of motion of Newton, that every force produces an equal and opposite counter force or reaction. So if you think about it, think of the old pendulum. If you pull the pendulum 2 degrees to this side, it'll go 2 degrees to the other side. So if you have a reigning power that tends to not go too far off center, it doesn't create an extreme reaction. But if you pull the pendulum all the way, then you do create an extreme equal and opposite reaction. And so I would say that one of the main reasons, apart from just general human depravity, that one of the reasons that we're seeing this sort of political extremism in America, and all over Europe, by the way, all over Europe, and is because it is a pendulum effect in response to an extremism on the other side. And it's like the chicken or the egg, who do you blame? So I don't want to blame anyone here, because you could say the leftist extremism, and it very much is extremism. It very much is an attempt to silence all other voices in the media and on campus, even if you have to be violent to do so, which is a recent development. And so, again, if you ask the question, who started the pendulum moving, whatever, and I'm not going to guess at that. All I can say is at this point in history, we are seeing a pendulum reaction to the right, and to ignore what it's a reaction to is not helpful, because we can't really solve the problem if we remain sectarian and blind to the historical forces operating. So therefore, sorry, that was the scenic road there, now back to the motorway. In response to your question, I would say the problem is extremism. I would also say, I'm sure you guys didn't see this one coming, the real solution is Krishna consciousness. I'm joking. But in a real sense, because the identity politics of the left, I mean, really, in the name of helping dozens of different oppressed groups, as they define it, it's really like a balkanizing of society, and strictly based on bodily identification, which, as you know, is a deadly sin for us. Balkanizing. Balkanizing means, because you look at the Balkan states, the former Yugoslavia, they have a long history of just fighting each other, like when Serbia attacked Bosnia. It's a very old story. For various historical reasons, those countries have sort of always been at each other's throats for many, many years. And so to balkanize something means to divide it into little warring camps. And so there are two ways that you can try to achieve equality or equal opportunity among people. And I think the left has chosen a disastrous way, and Krishna consciousness provides the right way. The disastrous way to try to do it is that basically you identify dozens of different oppressed groups, or even groups, even if actually, according to social science, say like in America, it can be proved that they have equal opportunity. When I was young, the battle cry was equal opportunity, because I was in Berkeley in the late 60s. I was on the streets fighting against the war in Vietnam and for civil rights and all those things. And the battle cry was equal opportunity. Everyone should have equal opportunity. So there is more or less equal opportunity, despite frankly, the absurd propaganda you get in the media about what's really happening in America. I mean, the social science shows there's never been a society in history that offered so much equal opportunity to so many diverse people. That's the real social science. That's the real history. But that doesn't sell newspapers. And so what you have to do is portray the country as, like policemen just sort of for recreation, just going around, white policemen shooting black youth and everything. The statistics give a very different story about what's wrong. For example, the fact that a white policeman is more likely to kill a white male than a black male. Or the fact that many, many, many times more whites are killed by blacks than blacks killed by whites. And so again, this is not against any race. These are just numbers. These are just statistics that you will never hear from the leftist media. So also so just like everyone fighting for their interest, everyone, in fact, the left strongly encourages, demands that everyone identify with their body. And I've seen that there's actually a big pushback now that's coming even from minorities, women. There's a whole new wave, this very powerful wave of moderate feminism and some of the best black scholars in the country, or distinguished scholars in the best universities. And what they're protesting is that I'm not my base. They're saying I'm not my body. I'm a human being, or I'm a person, or I'm a soul. And, I don't just want to be in a bodily category. And so the proposed solution of identity politics is to sort of demand that everyone strongly identify with their body, that you must identify. For example, when I ran into, I was taking a walk in the neighborhood where I live in Los Angeles, and ran into some Chicanos, and we were just talking, so I speak Spanish. And we somehow got into politics, and they were like bragging about how they voted for Trump. And the basic point they were, and a lot of them did actually, and the supporters, because they were saying, I'm not just a Latino, I'm a human being, and I have my own interests, and I have my own preferences. And so this demand that everyone identify with their body, and you are your body, and just thinking that you can achieve social peace by pushing the bodily concept of life, and different bodies are against each other. There's even original sin, for white males, and so, it's kind of like that you're the devil. And so basically, a lot of people are just saying enough. And then on the right, because I wouldn't be fair if I didn't bash the right. On the right, you have this crazy social Darwinism, the idea of sort of survival of the fittest. And they even now developed it. It's interesting because neurological studies, which they're doing a lot of now, show that people on the left tend to not understand, not grasp the importance of social solidarity. People kind of like following the same customs, not infinite diversity. Because basically what social science and history and neurology show, that if you just have unlimited diversity, society just disintegrates. And that in order to keep a society together, there's actually a minimum level required neurologically, getting to very primitive human instincts. There's a minimum level of solidarity where people aren't just different, they actually are similar, just for a society to survive. I mean, for example, in Australia, you have these wonderful swooping birds that I definitely want to take some home with me, so I can be swooped everywhere I go. But anyway, what's interesting is if you're walking on, I was walking out in the country in Queensland. No, not Queensland, actually by New Governor, north part of New South Wales. And birds, all animals signal each other. Animals, birds, they somehow know that this person is my species, this person is not threatening me. And so by the way you dress, by your manners, just by the way you conduct, by the way you speak, this is a very primitive level. This is at a very primitive, instinctual level. This is not philosophy, where all creatures and human beings signal each other, like I'm part of your community, you can trust me. Because how do you hold the social contract together? If you're driving your car and you're going at high speed, you see a green light in front of you, and you keep going, you are literally risking your life in your belief that people coming the other way are going to honor their social contract. They're going to stop at the red light. And so people's lives are literally at stake. If you're walking down a dark street at night, in the city, and someone's walking towards you, certain signals just tell you you're in danger, and other signals tell you you're not in danger. And there's the thing, fight or flight, there's the thing of statistics. What if you're walking down the street and someone's coming toward you when you see who that person is? Statistically, you're in 10 times more danger than if another type of person was walking down the street. These are statistics. So if you respond to that, and if you feel, if your whole body, your whole nervous system starts responding to the fact that it is 1,000% more likely you're in danger right now, is that prejudice, or is it being a rational human being? If you have to take a flight, let's say from Sydney to Melbourne, and one airline crashes 10 times more often, are you prejudiced because you don't buy a ticket on their airline? So it gets in, these kinds of discussions are not being had. They should be. And again, now let's go back to the right. So just as the left, according to serious academic studies by top scholars, they tend to chronically, predictably, not understand the basic science of how societies survive by signaling each other and how you maintain unity and how society can actually. But on the right, they go to the other extreme. On the right, they tend to go to the other extreme and to place too much faith in the natural benevolence of hierarchies, so that, we can just have laissez-faire capitalism. In other words, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And of course, as we know, you get to a certain tipping point where it's like if any of you watch martial arts, I mean, I wouldn't because I'm a sannyasi, I just happen to know a lot about it. So like, gurus know it all, right? It's just, yeah, I took the blue pill. So, what's that? Yes, too personal. But if it's just the nature, whether it's like one-on-one martial arts or whether it's a battle with one army against another, there's, so to speak, a tipping point where it can be a fairly even fight. It could go either way, and then at a certain point, it can be one punch, it can be one bomb, and the other side is somehow injured, weakened, and then it's a rout, and then it's just all over, and the other side just collapses, and so there are economic tipping points. There are economic tipping points where the rich get so rich that it's just the other side just collapses. Their ability to survive economically just sort of collapses. And I actually heard this. They've now, the right has actually, far right has formulated as a legal philosophy, sort of a pseudo-sophisticated legal philosophy, which I'll show you very briefly. The conclusion of all this is going to be join the Hare Krishna movement. That's what I get paid for, right? I'm here as a representative of the Hare Krishna movement. So so it's the philosophy of positive rights versus negative rights. And positive and negative, and this is like standard academic legal philosophy. This is not negative in the sense of bad. It doesn't mean good and bad. Negative rights means that you have a right not to be harmed in some way. Like, for example, you have a right not to be attacked in the street, not to be, or anywhere, not to be physically attacked, not to have someone break into your house. All these things, those are all negative rights. And so positive rights are, for example, the right to education, the right to medical care. And so the right now, certain people on the right have actually formulated kind of like this pseudo-intellectual argument that if you look at the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights, they did a constitution in the United States, and then people started complaining this constitution defines the legal system, separation of powers, but doesn't really guarantee certain basic rights. So then they did another document called the Bill of Rights, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on and so forth. So there's this argument that the Bill of Rights gives mostly negative rights, not positive rights. Like, it doesn't talk about your right to education, your right to medical care, and so on. And so they're pushing this idea of basically social Darwinism. Everybody has a right not to have other people criminally assault them or steal from them. But once you're protected from that, it's every person for themselves. And if you end up poor, and they even give the argument, they actually give this argument, that if you have, let's say, like universal health care, so that every citizen has a right to medical care, then that's unconstitutional. Because in order to get that, doctors have to be required to treat patients within this healthcare system. However, every citizen who's a doctor has the right not to treat people. And therefore, the government doesn't have the right to require people, doctors, to treat other people. And therefore, a healthcare system which requires doctors to treat certain patients with compensation, but under certain government-mandated conditions, that's, in other words, the right of the doctor not to be forced to treat someone for a government-stipulated amount of money is more important than that person's right to health care. So I suppose even if that person is in pain, suffering, it could be a child, their right to be treated in a civilized way is less important than the doctor's right to do whatever he wants. So there's different figures like Ayn Rand, heard of Ayn Rand? Real nutcase. But anyway, so this sort of libertarianism, this idea that, so here's the basic flaw in that. I mean, philosophically, what the basic mistake is in that approach. The basic mistake is that it misunderstands the essential identity of human beings. It envisions a world in which we are first and foremost individuals. And the only reason governments and societies exist is to facilitate the freedom of individuals. There's a big flaw here. If you study what we really are, as souls or just as human beings, we are actually both individuals and we are social. For example, an individual, if you were left alone as an individual, as a baby, you would, well, first of all, you would die. And even if you were kept alive, you know, like they threw food at you or something, or made sure that wild animals didn't carry you off, even if you were just physically kept alive, you would grow up as in the literal clinical sense of the word, an imbecile. The fact that you can speak language, and you know, if you ask the question, can you think without language? Can people who do not have language, can they think? Can they conceptualize? Can they reason? No. And you cannot acquire language except as a member of a community or society. And communities are only safe when they're parts of societies that protect them. And so if you look at the nature of the world, the fact that, as Hobbes, the English philosopher, pointed out, that people are so inclined to be selfish and even be violent. And so we are both individual and we are social. We are private and we are public. And because we receive extraordinary benefits from communities and societies, that creates an obligation which we have to pay back. And so to pursue life as if it's just about individuals pigging out, that, you know, everyone trying to get their snout into the trough, and really minimizing or just not even recognizing social responsibility, community responsibility, the need to see that no person or no creature unnecessarily suffers when that suffering can be relieved. In fact, it's like a moral principle that if we have the power to relieve someone's suffering, then we actually have the moral obligation to do so. And so on the right, they completely, a lot of these people, not all of them, some of them are sane, some of them are insane, but they tend to just push this very unrealistic, just delusional idea of what we are as people. So, Krishna consciousness to the rescue. Dun, dun, dun. In Krishna consciousness, I believe, and not just because if I don't say this, you won't feed me today, but I mean, actually, as, I mean, that also definitely influences my decisions, but that Krishna consciousness actually has an ideal balance between individual freedom and social responsibility. And the reason is because we see ourselves as free souls with free will, but also we understand that every other living being, not only humans, this is not anthropo-chauvinism, humanism. Like there's sexism, racism, humanism. By the way, all these isms like sexism, racism, it's basically the ignorant idea that someone's worth, someone's value as a living being can be decided by their body type. Like if you have this kind of body, then you deserve to be treated with dignity, and your basic needs are of concern to us. And if you have that body type, then not as much, or not at all. And so, I mean, that's what race is, because when you say racism, race is a bodily feature. When you say sexism, your gender is a bodily feature. When we say species, that's just another bodily feature. So speciesism, as I say, is the next moral frontier. And so in Krishna consciousness, we recognize that not only that every living being is a soul, and an equal soul. Like, you know, our bodies may be different. You may be able to run faster than me, although don't challenge me. Just kidding. But so our bodies, you know, we have different abilities. Some of us are more musical. Some of us are better at math. Some of us have a higher emotional IQ. Some of us are artists. Some people are just better at administration. And so there's all kinds of different abilities. And yet, we all agree, as I'm sure we do, that whatever our different abilities are, every one of us deserves equally to be respected as a soul, regardless of what our material positions may be. And of course, this is true for all living beings. So not only do we respect everyone because we are all souls, and therefore there's a natural empathy. Like, let's say you're traveling in, I don't know, Brazil, and you suddenly meet another true blue Aussie who, is from your town or something. It's like immediately you guys are going to be friends. Now, if you met the same person in your town, you wouldn't think of talking to them because everybody in your town is in your town. But when you meet that person, let's say in some other place, because there's empathy. Because when you're surrounded by people that are different from you in some ways, and you meet someone who's like you, it's interesting. So ultimately, everyone is a soul. So there's a natural empathy. It's a natural empathy toward every living being if we simply understand who they really are. So there's not only this natural empathy which follows just according to the way we are psychologically made, but also it's all family. It's all family because Krishna says in the Gita, he's the father of the universe and the mother, by the way, I should point out. He's also the mother of the universe. Krishna says, Pitahamasya Jagato, Mata, father, the mother, and so on. So we're all family. And so because the whole universe, there's only ultimately one family. I mean, we all have our different bio families, and we have certain special duties or certain special affection for people who are actually our biological family. That's natural in this world. But at the same time, in a higher sense, in a more profound sense, every living being in the universe is one family. What do they say in India? Jagat Kutumba or something? So the whole universe is a family. So another big flaw on the right, because I did a lot of left bashing, so I'll do a little more right bashing because it's just fun to bash somebody. And that is, there's this, I would say on the right, on the hard right. I mean, there's a center right, which I think, they're ladies and gentlemen. But there's a hard right, which is, I think they're monstrously hypocritical. They're monstrously hypocritical because the right tends to defend religion, mostly Christianity. But if you actually claim to be religious or Christian, whatever, then what about the Good Samaritan? I mean, Jesus praised the Good Samaritan. While everybody else walked by, it's the Good Samaritan that stopped and really tried to help. Now, their answer to this will be that, oh yeah, we believe we should be Good Samaritans, and actually Christians give, on average, more charity than atheists, which is actually true. They tend to give more money in charity. However, they say it should not be done by the government. Now, the problem with this argument, because the government gets involved, it'll just mess everything up. Governments are horribly inefficient. They waste most of the money they get by taxing us. And so they ruin our economies and don't really get the job done well. That's their argument. Therefore, it should be left to the private sector, to the goodwill of private citizens. The problem with this is it's a really good argument. It's just 200 years too late. In the sense that if you look at the pre-industrial world, say in Europe, I happen to know about England because of my study of English literature. But if you look at, for example, England 200 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution really changed everything by urbanizing human life and destroying extended families, but because of economic pressure, as Marx noted, because if you live in the country, actually you do live in the country, but anyway, let's say you do like a farm, let's say you actually farm for a living, as most people used to do, the more children you have, the richer you are. Because there's always work to do. I mean, there's infinite jobs to do when you actually live in a country, in the farm, and it's not highly industrialized, it's not mechanized. And that's why extended families, people stuck together. When you move into a city, the more children you have, the poorer you are. So have more children, hello poverty. Because when you have a lot of children, because the children, it used to be that kids at a young age go out and work. That was, of course, cruel and depressive and abusive. Now the children take drugs, sleep around, and ride around their skateboards. And so people in former ages were actually very cruel because they forced the children to actually do something useful and productive to help their families rather than taking drugs and having sex and riding on skateboards. So that's a clear sign of cultural progress. Anyway, for which we are justified in looking down on people who came before us. But if you look at that, the pre-industrial world, people, they were doing useful things. Children weren't enslaved, no matter what, whatever. But so anyway, with the breakup of the extended family and all this industrial revolution, so what happened before all that? Let's look at England, and pretty much Europe was the same. But if you look at England, in every village or little town, and there would be, this is just the way the world used to be. It was like the wheel and spokes geometry. That's how people lived. In other words, there would be a little trading market town. That's why in England they call these market towns. There'd be a little, you're not texting me. There would be a little market town, and then people lived around in the country, and everybody would just come into the market. So it was like a hub and spokes, I should say. With the invention of the car and urbanization, cities were turned into grids. And so if you look at modern planned cities, you could, then it's just like they're grids. But anyway, so in these old European villages, the squire was the richest guy in the area. And he was actually morally responsible to take care of the people in his area. And you see this in literature of the time. You see, for example, a beautiful young woman who's, this is in the book Emma by Jane Austen, her family is the richest family in their area. She personally has to go around and bring food to all the people that need food. And if people need some kind of medical care, they have to provide it. In fact, and so the rich families were the welfare system. The government didn't do these things because you didn't have big cities, and it was cultural. It was a moral obligation. And so, but with the cities, people no longer see their neighbors. When you go into cities, everything's anonymous. You're driving down the street, and people are just machines coming at you. And you don't even say hello to people, you walk by. The social psychology could not be more different from the country. And when people don't know each other, they don't really see each other. They don't I know you, I knew your father, I knew your grandfather, I know, people don't know each other, then they don't care about each other. And so what happened is people started moving into the cities because of the Industrial Revolution. And you had this old culture where there's no such thing as a government welfare thing. It didn't exist. There was no social welfare. But in the cities, there were no big families, no villages, so people just fell through the cracks. They just died. They just starved to death. Or they got diseases that no one treated. And one person really spoke out strongly against this when it really started to manifest, because the cities had grown so big, the Industrial Revolution had gone so far that it was really getting crazy. And so there was a great writer in England who spoke out against this. It was Charles Dickens. You get things like Oliver Twist and all these different stories where he's saying that this is crazy. A Christmas Carol, Scrooge. That's the point that. So, by the way, in the same city as Dickens, at exactly the same time, there was another person who saw the same problems and wanted to solve the same problems, And instead of going about it in sort of a pious, God-conscious way as Dickens did, he thought religion was the problem, and he wanted to solve the same problems in the same city in a different way, and that was Karl Marx. Now, here we are, about 150 years later, approximately 167 years later. What we see as Marxism was gifted the world with the brutal murder of about 100 million innocent people, which is, I mean, you can't get your head around that number. It's just, you can hear the number, but we're not wired to even understand what that means. Killing tens and dozens of millions of innocent people. Whereas Dickens has actually inspired people all over the world to be charitable. I'm sure in Australia, like in America, every Christmas season, you see the Christmas Carol on television, right? I mean, it must be. And in fact, there was a movie that came out recently, which is called The Man Who Invented Christmas. Because if you look at older literature, I mean, certainly in England, Christmas was not a big holiday. For example, Easter. Easter is religiously important, but it's not like the holiday season because it's Easter. So Christmas used to be like Easter. Just an important event if you're a serious Christian, but that's about it. That's what Christmas used to be. The person who changed all that, who made it the season, the Christmas season, where families get together and you give gifts and you're charitable, that was Charles Dickens, one man, one little book. But what's interesting is two people, same place, same time, concerned about the same problem, trying to fix it. One person tried to do it in a God-conscious way. The other person tried to do it in an atheistic way. The God-conscious person actually has inspired who knows how many millions and hundreds of millions of people to be charitable, to care about other people. The other person somehow inspired the brutal massacre of unprecedented numbers of people. It was very interesting, atheism. And the person who inspired the massacre of unprecedented numbers of innocent men, women, and children is still a kind of hero on leftist college campuses. Whereas the idea of Dickens, of God consciousness, is kind of like, nah, that's the problem. That caused the wars. It's interesting. And you wonder why people have really had enough with political correctness. So anyway, but be that as it may, going back to right bashing, to be fair here, I want to be an equal opportunity basher. On the right, when they say that the government shouldn't get involved, like the right in America, we shouldn't have a universal care system, which is a wonderful act of barbarism, and that it should be left to the private sector, they're like a few hundred years too late. Because now that most people live in big cities in which you're anonymous and hardly anyone knows anyone else except their little tiny circle, you practically don't have real functioning communities in the sociological sense of the term. And if you don't have government programs, people will literally starve to death, and men, women, and children will suffer and even die from horrible, from conditions for which they could be treated. Their pain will not be relieved. They'll be forced to live. And so what I see when I look out at the world and I try to look at it, objectively, is that on both sides, they're crazy. They're dangerous and crazy. And the solution is not just to bash the right. The solution is to bash everyone. Kidding, I'm good. In other words, the real point, so it's really extremism. Because actually most people are not extremists. Most people are not extremists. But for example, in America, if you're at a typical college campus, which is basically a one-party system, one-party leftist system, if you dare to oppose political correctness, they'll make your life miserable. And most young people go to college because they want to get a degree and get on with their lives. They don't want to be humiliated and persecuted and even, for example, get lower grades in classes because your leftist teacher will not tolerate certain kinds of politically incorrect views. So most students, I would say, are actually moderate. It's not worth the trouble. But so Krishna consciousness, I think on rational grounds, because I'm a big critic of many things in the Hare Krishna movement. But on this point, I think on rational grounds, Krishna consciousness is a solution. Because rather than dividing everyone by insisting that everyone identify with their body and see other bodies, people in other bodies as their enemies, even if they're not really doing anything against you, or rather than the right, just insisting on our right to just be as greedy and power hungry as we want, no matter how much human suffering is caused by that. In Krishna consciousness, first of all, we see everyone as spirit soul, and yet at the same time we respect individual freedom and initiative. We don't try to shame people because they disagree. So Krishna consciousness, if we see everyone as soul, you get the unity. Because if you really see everyone as soul, or even if, let's say, people in general are not spiritual geniuses, and maybe they're not like in high states of consciousness, but at least if you have a society where culturally it's expected of you to act as if people are spirit soul, then people will care about each other. You'll have this dramatic increase in empathy, and people will elect governments that care about other people. And so Krishna consciousness, you get equality, you get universal empathy without having to just go to the outlandish extremes. It's just like on the right, everyone knows that some people on the right deny climate change. At least they deny that human beings cause climate change. But on the other hand, on the left, there's this massive science denial. Because, for example, when you switch from equal opportunity to equal outcome, you don't get equal outcome like let's say women, most women don't want to be metallurgists, or they don't want to be digital engineers, although, for example, women are dominating the medical field. More women become doctors than men. More women become nurses than men. More women are engaged in all kinds of educated professions in which you have to really care about people, because all the studies show that women care more about people and men care more about things, ideas, like we got to get this job done. And women actually tend to care about people. So in occupations where you have to care about people, and it's not like, oh, you're less intelligent because you care about people. So it's not about who's better, it's just about what people want to do. And men are much more likely to go into jobs that are very risky, like combat, or let's say oil platforms and these, like, where, at any moment a big wave will come and just sweep you into this frozen sea. And men think, well, that's cool, just bring a lot of beer. Men are more intelligent. So it's interesting. You see, the official explanation of why more men than women choose certain occupations and more women choose others is that it's all culturally determined. It's all culturally determined because the evil patriarchy has been like pushing this idea. But social science gives a very different picture. What we find is that if you compare the choices, the career choices that men and women make, in the countries where women have the most freedom, they're economically free, they're culturally free. For example, in American universities now, there's a diversity problem in universities because so many more women get into the better schools. Because, women tend not to be stupid binge drinkers when they're in college, and their brains mature faster, and therefore they're now thinking of like some kind of social program to make sure that, women don't just totally dominate the universities, because they get into universities more. So if you look at societies where women really have freedom, they have total access to education, they have financial freedom, and they can basically do what they want. What you find is that in those societies, and probably like the biggest cases would be, say, Scandinavia, where they'll almost like, execute, just send you off to some island on, and with only bread and water, if you'd like dare to say that men and women are different. But if you look at those societies, that have the least, let's say that really give the most freedom to women and legally guarantee it. It's not just culturally, legally. They guarantee all kinds of rights to women. In those societies, men and women tend to make more different choices. There's the choices between men and women, what they really want to do in their lives tends to be more different in free societies than, say, in societies where women are enslaved or women are put down, women are, like just really grossly chauvinistic societies. So in free societies, women and men, even to the greatest extent, make different choices because they really just do what they want to do. I won't go into all the statistics on this. It's actually an interesting topic. It's just one example of how on the left also, on the extreme left, just like the extreme right, they deny science. And I've had people tell me this in discussions. Like if they have to choose between their dogma and massive social science, they're going with the dogma. It's like if you tell, let's say, like a fanatical Christian, well, there's all this scholarship about how the New Testament was actually written and who wrote the New Testament and what we actually know historically about Jesus, and not in the sense of denying Jesus, not saying he wasn't the Son of God, but just, there's a lot of things you have to look at. They reject, they don't want to hear that. They're going to go with their dogma. And so on the left and right, you have these dogmatic people, these fanatical people who equally deny science, perhaps more so on the left nowadays, for various historical reasons. And so the middle is Krishna consciousness. Getting back to Govinda Valley, Govinda Valley is a great project which is kind of leading the way to try to give this beautiful knowledge to people. And so that's why I think, the reason I went into all this, because one reason is because I think it's really important. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that a Vaishnava, or just a spiritual person, someone who takes spiritual things seriously, should be udasina vadasina, which means, asina means sitting, like the word asana. This is like a present participle verb from the same root. You have the word asana, which means a seat, and this is sitting, asina. But in Sanskrit, that verb to sit can mean either an actual seat, like an asana is an actual seat, but it can also mean as a verb to remain in a certain situation, like I'm just going to, sit this one out, or I'm just going to, to sit means you remain, you stay, you don't change your position. So you can use actually the verb to sit as an auxiliary verb, meaning to keep on doing something. And so because when you sit, it means you don't move, you're not going anywhere. So therefore it means just to continue in your present position, not to change. And so, and the prefix ud in Sanskrit means up or above. And so Krishna says that a spiritual person should be udasina, which means literally like sitting above the fray. Like, in other words, shouldn't be partisan, shouldn't be dogmatic, shouldn't be like, I care about these people, I don't care about those people. Or these people are all good, those people are all evil. And so a Vaishnava should be above all this and should, first of all, see everyone as soul, as spirit soul, understand that there's enough fault to go around on all sides, and there's virtue in a lot of different places. I had this one experience, this little anecdote. When I joined the Hare Krishna movement in 1969 in Berkeley, I was very much on the left. I was in Berkeley in the late 60s, and I was out there on the street. In fact, my brother and myself, our picture was on the front page of the Oakland Tribune, the main newspaper in Oakland, which is next to Berkeley across from San Francisco, and in a big riot, some leftist riot against something the government was doing, and there were our pictures. And so, so then I joined the Hare Krishna movement. Oh my God. Anyway, I joined the Hare Krishna movement, and I was out on Telegraph Avenue. It's the main student street that had all the riots and everything in Berkeley. And I was selling Back to Godhead magazine, stuff like that. And so I just assumed, to me, it was the most obvious truth in the world that I should only approach people on the left. And in those days, it was very obvious, who was on the left. You dressed a certain way, you had your hair a certain way. Anyone could tell who was on the left and who was on the right by the way they dressed. And so I just approached people on the left because I thought they're the people who are open-minded. They're the people who would be interested in Krishna consciousness. I never thought about it. I wouldn't. So then one day, when I was a very young devotee, I was selling magazines out there. And I remember I approached some, I guess what I used to call them mountain hippies. They were like kind of like long-haired hippies, but they kind of lived up in the mountains. They have big knives on their belt and everything. And, you know, they're Americans, they're armed. And so I remember I approached them and they were like really hostile. I mean, not just, no thank you, not this time. They were really hostile, like angry at me because I was, you know, whatever. And almost threatening. And then that same day, this guy came up to me who was like so white bread. I mean, he was, you know, probably like looked like a fraternity type. I mean, kind of guy that maybe majored in business, and like in Berkeley in the late 60s, you major in business, you know, you were the enemy. And so he's, you know, really nicely dressed, looked like a business major or something. And I would never approach a person like that. Wouldn't even consider it. So he just came up to me very humbly and said, could I buy one of your magazines? And it was like, ding, 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 ding. So I remember that back in those days, the sociology departments were like the nerve centers of the Marxist movement. You know, like against Vietnam, not only against Vietnam, the Vietnam War was just an opportunity to promote Marxism. And so the sociology departments tended to be like the nerve center of the leftist Marxist movement. So I had a philosophy professor, actually a teaching assistant, but he you know, taught one of my courses. Still remember his name actually, Hal Jacobs. And he was from New York, because, you know, California people are too nice. So all these really heavy Marxists, you know, were all from New York. Anyway, he was like this heavy Marxist, and he kind of saw me as his protege. Because I was like the brightest guy in his class and everything. And so he kind of saw me as a protege. And then a year or two later, because he knew me, and he was, by the way, he was one of the leaders of the leftist movement in Berkeley. He was like in the inner circle of actually organizing the whole revolutionary movement in Berkeley. And so then a year or two after I'd taken his class, he was walking by, I guess with his girlfriend or wife, and I was out on the street in dhoti kurta, and I was, you know, making the world safe for incense. And when he saw me like that in the Hare Krishna movement, he went crazy. I mean, literally, I thought I was gonna have a stroke or something. He was just, because he was a Marxist, and therefore religion was evil. You know, religion was the enemy. And he was literally beside it. I mean, I really feared for his health because he was so, and I remember him saying, I'm never gonna trust anyone again. And he was like sputtering and furious, and, you know, because he had no idea what my philosophy was. So when you actually go out there in the world, what you find is there are good people everywhere. You know, some good people are on the left, some good people are on the right. They're just souls, they're all souls, and you can find sincere souls in the strangest places. I had one experience in 1976 in December. I was a sannyasi, no, not 1976, sorry, 1973. I was a young sannyasi, and I was working with Satsarupa, who wrote Prabhupada's biography. We were working together, and so he had set up a little temporary preaching center in San Antonio, Texas. Don't mess with Texas. It's back in 1970. Those are the days when Texas was kind of white and very racist and very violent, and I mean, it's kind of like in the movies. So in 1973 in San Antonio, as they say, San Antonio, Texas, I went to, Satrup had to go back to the Gurukula. He was the head of the Gurukula, so I temporarily took over his program in San Antonio, and I was doing this program. Somehow the devotees arranged, actually the brahmachari who arranged the program, I think, was later became Bhakti Swami. And so he was a brahmachari traveling with us. And so it was at the Lions Club of San Antonio, Texas in 1973. So I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? So I went in there with my dhoti and, sannyasi dhoti and courts and all that. And I gave this rousing patriotic speech, about America. But I was just quoting Prabhupada. I just never, it didn't in any way conflict with our philosophy. I just kind of found a way to give a rousing, Krishna conscious, go America speech. And to all these sort of, well-to-do cowboys. And they loved it. They kept interrupting me with applause, and they were just. And then at the end, they gave me this plaque, and they wanted to take their picture with me. I remember, for example, it's not that. We also had great programs in leftist areas. It's not that. I'm not saying it's on one side. It's, for example, I've lectured at, I can't count how many universities in America and other countries. And perhaps the best program we ever had in terms of people buying every single piece of literature we brought. This never happened because I gave the lecture. And after the lecture, I was talking to people. And by the time I, was leaving, I walked by our book table. There's literally nothing on it. Nothing. Not a card, not a pamphlet, not a book, not a magazine. They bought everything. And that was at the University of Mississippi. And the University of Iowa, Iowa. How do you like that corn? So I did a program in 1973. I spoke at the University of Iowa, which is kind of a few years behind, in America they have this term, like the people who are bi-coastal, which means that, you're on the West Coast, and if you leave the West Coast, you only fly to New York or Washington or Boston or something. And all the other states in the middle, they call flyover states. So, yeah, that's a very common term, bi-coastal, flyover states, which is, by the way, why the Democrats lost the last election, because they didn't really understand that the flyover states have a lot more votes. Anyway, so, we did a program at the University of Iowa in 1973, and the students were so enthusiastic. We did a kirtan, and they were literally knocking their chairs over. They were dancing so ecstatically. They were just like really they were just in ecstasy. We had a room about 60 students, and this was based on like 24-hour advertising. We just went around for literally one day, or maybe less than 24 hours. Probably less than 24 hours, just maybe half a day, because we were real young and passionate. Just half a day, went out, invited people, gave invitations. We got 60 people to come, and they were all chanting and dancing, practically more ecstatically than you'll see in a Hare Krishna temple. And one person actually joined us, a pre-medical student, which really made his father happy, but that's another story. So anyway, so obviously people who are not conservative or whatever, not in conservative places, many of them joined the Hare Krishna movement. And we already know, like yoga community or other communities, we know we have a lot of friends. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a big world out there. And there are very sincere souls in places you would not expect to find them. And it's the duty of Vaishnava, it's the duty of us who've been gifted with this amazing spiritual knowledge to really transcend our own human preferences and really be equal to everyone, to be a friend to everyone, to give everyone the same chance to learn about Krishna. There's a verse about the Vaishnavas in the Bhagavatam, which is Titikshava. They're tolerant and karunika, merciful, and suhradak sarva dehinam. They're the well-wishers. The Sanskrit word that Prabhupada often translated well-wisher is literally suhrit, which means good-hearted. Suhrit. By the way, we have both those words in English. Okay, sorry, I'm having a linguistic attack. I'll just give you a little. Su in Sanskrit means good, like sukriti, good deed, or suhrit, good heart. And this Sanskrit prefix su came to English through Greek. The Greeks, Sindhu Hindu, right? You know that whole rap. So when languages moved toward the West, Sanskrit, they first moved through the Persian Empire, or just the Persian civilization, in which an initial S was dropped and replaced by an H. That's how Sindhu became Hindu. And that's also, by the way, how Samo in Sanskrit, equal, became the Persian homo, as in homogeneous, meaning the same. And now, when it kept going into Greece, the Greeks did not pronounce an H at the beginning of a word, as in the English word honor or hour. It's funny, at Harvard, I had this professor was from Italy, and she was like we were good friends, but she was trying to sort of like overcompensating, trying to speak English. So she would talk about honor. But anyway, so we don't pronounce the H. So therefore, Hindu in the Persian dialect became India. That's how the H was dropped, and it becomes India or Indus. And so in the same way with Sioux, by the time it gets to Greece, you drop the S and it becomes EU, as in, for example, eugenics or euphonic or euphemism. It means good, same thing. So eugenics means good breeding. Euphonic means a good sound. And oh my God. I won't answer this. Let me just tell him, like, in the middle of a class, I'll call you back, okay? That's Brahmacharya. He's a great devotee. So what was the word I was giving you?
Su.
And what was Su what?
Suhrit.
Suhrit, yes, Suhrit. Hrit, of course, is just heart. Hrit is just heart, it's the same word. So, good-hearted. So we should have, the Bhagavatam says we should have a... Well, it's nice to meet you. Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Have a nice time.
You too. So Suhrit, we should have a good heart toward everyone. Animals, humans. And it's interesting because there's so many people in America, and I suspect other places, that really do love their dogs much more than they love some other humans. What's that?
Even in Australia.
Yeah. So that's, in a sense, the challenge for you. I mean, I'm sure you're up to the challenge. I'm sure you already do it that way.
Yeah, well, actually, I have to make the point that what we're interested in really, in terms of people coming here to work, is not whether they're Hare Krishna, not whether they're good people.
Yeah.
That's what we're interested in, connecting with good people and working with good people. And we're not really concerned what their philosophy is as long as they're good people.
Yes, and how should I... Like when we were young, you remember, we were a bit, what's a nice way to say this? Zealous? Yeah, zealous, that would be a nice way to say it. And it was like, everyone has to be a Hare Krishna. And so naturally, something happened, which is we became adults. And so now we understand we actually have to be nice and not just like. At the same time, I'll tell you what my position is, honestly. That, first of all, I absolutely respect everyone's right to follow the path that works for them. Which is, I mean, that's obvious. I think it should be obvious. And I have to respect them and although there are some limits on that. For example, if someone says that terrorism is just my path, that's my religion, I can't respect that. I had a discussion with a lady in Denver one time because she had a bumper sticker on her car that said, we have to respect all religions. And I said, well, what about religions that enslave women or kill innocent people? And she admitted, yeah, probably not those. So what I would say is that I totally support diversity among good people. I think all forms of, for example, let's say you have some predatory capitalist who just, it's more important to buy another yacht than that, children have fresh water or eat. And what if that person says, well, this is just my path, diversity. I'm for diversity, and this is my path. So what I sincerely support, is diversity of virtue. Like, people are really, and it's not just subjective. For example, helping people is virtuous. That's not subjective. That's just not my opinion. That if you, and it really helped, not like, well, yeah, I share my heroin with my kids, so, no, I don't mean that. And here, I'm not just talking about what's written in the scripture. I'm not just, being a Gita thumper, like a Bible thumper. So that, I think social science is important, history is important. So if someone can show that it's reasonable for me to believe that I'm helping people and the person has good reasons, then we respect that. That's real virtue. That's real goodness. And they may have their own way. They may want to help people in a different way. At the same time, in my view, it is not fanatical or disrespectful. It's not fanatical or disrespectful to anyone to claim that there's an absolute truth. And, we spoke about dialectic. And I think society has bounced between extremes, because if you look at the religious history of the West, a lot of it is really awful. If you, as I always say, if you look at things like the Inquisitions, the Crusades, and the witch trials and everything, you may think it was really bad, but if you actually study the history, it was much worse. It was actually worse than you think. And so if you look at the fanaticism, the brutality, the murder, the torture, there has been this massive allergic reaction in the Western world. When people finally got their freedom, that's why people fought for secular society. Secular society means not, there's no religion that is in charge. Because the history is just, it's horrible. There were a lot of good people. There were a lot of sincere people. There were even saints, in Jewish or Christian traditions. But overall, it was just like, it was horrible. And so it's perfectly natural. So what we really have in the Western world, on a civilization-wide basis, not just individual, we have a civilization-wide case of post-traumatic stress disorder. It really is. Because trauma can be collective. There's not merely individual trauma, there's collective trauma. And I would say all of Western civilization is just recovering from this post-traumatic stress disorder. Which is, and what they always say about PTSD is, it is a natural, even healthy reaction to unnatural, unhealthy events. So someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder, it could be just because they're a normal, healthy person. Because if you look at it, the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, two of the main symptoms are, number one, hypervigilance. In other words, all of us, I hope, are, try to be prudent and not do stupid, reckless things. But when you have PTSD, it becomes hypervigilance. Like things that even, let's say, a prudent person would not consider dangerous, that person may consider dangerous. Hypervigilance, extreme vigilance. And the corollary of hypervigilance is withdrawal, because you're like, it's almost like unnaturally afraid that you see danger in certain things that most people wouldn't consider dangerous. Therefore, withdrawal, you withdraw. Like situations where you might stay a little longer, you might look into it, you might hear what they have to say, you pull out because that could be dangerous. And so my point is that Western civilization needs to get past this PTSD and not see, let's say, theological debate as somehow dangerous and like really bad. In other words, let's say people get together with mutual respect. With mutual respect. It's not like if you don't agree with me, God will torture you forever. We don't have a God who really is probably the worst psychopath ever known, who tortures his own children forever for relatively minor theological mistakes. So if we have mutual respect, real respect, like I respect that you're sincerely following your path. I respect that God is in your life just as God is in my life or whatever, even if you don't belong to my group. In that atmosphere, we can actually discuss and we can even argue about things. I mean, what would happen, let's say, in the field of biology if it was considered to be terrible manners and just unacceptable for scholars, biologists to ever debate each other? What if historians never debated? You name it. You name any field where people seriously study. If it was considered to be totally unacceptable to argue or debate, you would get terrible biology, terrible history, terrible dentistry, terrible everything. Because it's in that process of debate with mutual respect, free and open debate, that people refine their understanding, come to better positions. So at the present time, you kind of have two fanatic groups in the West. You have religious fanatics and people who are fanatically relativistic about religion. And the idea that there cannot even be a highest truth. Because if someone claims there's a highest truth, you are threatening the self-esteem of other people. And so therefore, self-esteem is more important than getting at any kind of spiritual truth. And so you have these like dueling fanaticisms. You know, one produced the other. And what I'm saying is, we have to go beyond that, like get over it. It's been centuries since people were burned at the stake, and it's actually safe for us to have discussions with mutual respect. And that if and it's not rude or fanatical or dangerous necessarily to state that there is a highest truth. It doesn't invalidate other people's truths necessarily. It doesn't shame other people. It doesn't threaten other people. It's actually bringing some because if you say that no one can say their truth is better, you have nothing to say to terrorists. You have nothing to say to them because your position is that no one can say that anyone else's position is wrong or that there's any other truth. You can't say that to anybody. So you have nothing to say to people who are doing evil in the name of religion. You have nothing to say to them. So I believe personally that I don't want to get stuck in religious fanaticism. I can tell you personally, I hate religious fanaticism. And what really galvanized my intolerance toward fanaticism is I spent a few months in Israel. And which I think is a great country, and there's a lot of great people there. The press tends to totally misconstrue a lot of things that happen there. So if you just read the leftist press, you have no idea what's going on in Israel. But in any case, it is a fact that there are fanatics there. Most Israelis are not fanatics, but there is a significant fanatical Orthodox extreme, although it's not a majority. And on the Muslim side, there are fanatics. Not everyone. I would say probably most Muslims in Israel are not fanatics, but there's a significant group of fanatics. And just being there in this very small country where it's kind of like everywhere you look, I thought, I can't stand this. Whether it's political fanaticism or religious fanaticism, and even if it's the fanaticism of saying there cannot be a highest truth, I can't stand that fanaticism either. So, yeah, I think we have to get past fanaticism and just respect each other and have reasonable conversations. You make your points, I'll make my points, and, we'll try to be reasonable. But I don't want to a priori say that there can't be a highest truth. So in that sense, I still have a little enthusiasm to try to bring Krishna to people, I have to admit.
Well, we should wrap up because we've got lunch ready. It's been sitting there for a while.
Thank you all for your patience. It's and I'll just end by saying that I really, really do appreciate what you're all doing here, and I sincerely thank you for it. Because you're helping a lot of people, and of course helping yourselves also. And thanks to all the people who are watching in other countries or places.
So I'm not sure what the program is.